Have you ever walked into a room and felt the energy shift? Not because someone was shouting or commanding attention, but because of their complete stillness? Imagine a person who enters any space and immediately everyone stops performing, stops pretending, stops their little games of manipulation and deceit. Why? Because they sense something terrifying, a mind that cannot be broken, bought, or bent. This isn't about charisma or charm. This is about something far more dangerous, psychological immunity. The kind of mental fortress that Machiavelli himself would have envied, a consciousness so disciplined and detached that it becomes a mirror, reflecting back people's own weaknesses while revealing nothing of its own. Think about the last time you tried to read someone and failed completely. Remember that unsettling feeling when your usual tactics, your charm, your threats, your emotional appeals, bounced off them like water off stone? That person had built what the great strategist called the ruthless mind. Not ruthless because it destroys, but because it cannot be destroyed. Not cruel because it enjoys pain, but immune because it has transcended the very weaknesses that make others controllable. Most people walk through life as open books, their desires written across their faces, their fears exposed in their reactions, their pressure points visible to anyone who cares to look. They flinch when insulted, beam when praised, and crumble under the right kind of pressure. But what if you could become psychologically bulletproof? What if your emotional responses became so disciplined that people couldn't find a single crack to exploit? The foundation of this mental fortress begins with something most people never achieve: absolute clarity of purpose. While others drift between contradictory desires, changing their goals with their moods, the ruthless mind has undergone a brutal self-interrogation. It has asked the questions that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. What do I actually want beyond comfort and safety? Who must I become to achieve it? What am I willing to sacrifice along the way? And perhaps most importantly, what am I willing to become indifferent to? This clarity doesn't come from motivation videos or vision boards. It emerges from a merciless conversation with your own soul, stripping away the layers of social conditioning, family expectations, and cultural programming until you find the core of what you actually serve. Once this purpose crystallizes, everything else becomes noise. The opinions of others lose their sting. Distractions reveal themselves as enemies. Emotions transform from masters into tools. Most people are confused about what they want, so they can be manipulated by anyone who seems to know. They seek validation from strangers, approval from enemies, and acceptance from those who would never sacrifice anything for them. But the ruthless mind operates from a position of internal certainty, so strong that external chaos cannot penetrate it. Consider how most people reveal their weaknesses within minutes of meeting them. They talk too much when nervous, seeking approval through oversharing. They defend themselves against accusations no one has made, revealing their deepest insecurities. They name drop and exaggerate, showing you exactly what they're desperate to be seen as. But the ruthless mind gives away nothing. It watches, absorbs, and files away information, while remaining a complete mystery to everyone around it. This brings us to the second pillar: absolute control over emotional output. People don't fear what you feel. They fear what they cannot read. Every time you react predictably to provocation, praise, or pressure, you hand over a weapon that can be used against you indefinitely. The ruthless mind understands that emotional reaction is currency, and it spends nothing carelessly. This doesn't mean becoming emotionally numb or robotic. It means your feelings become disciplined soldiers rather than chaotic rebels. You can experience rage, joy, sorrow, or desire, but only in private, only on your terms, never when others expect or demand it. When someone insults you, they see only calm reflection. When they praise you, they encounter only measured silence. When they try to pressure you, they meet an unmovable force that gives them nothing to work with. This controlled detachment creates a psychological phenomenon that most people find deeply unsettling. They cannot map your emotional landscape, which means they cannot predict your responses, which means they cannot control you. And in a world where most people's entire social strategy depends on emotional manipulation, encountering someone who is immune to it creates a kind of existential panic. The third element is perhaps the most powerful, the instant identification of weakness in others. While everyone else is focused on what people are saying, the ruthless mind is studying what they're revealing. It listens not for information, but for tells, the word they repeat too often, the silence they avoid, the person they keep defending without being asked, the moment they seek validation that was never offered. These aren't just personality quirks. They are psychological fault lines where power leaks out. The ruthless mind becomes a predator of information, constantly asking, what does this person crave that they'll compromise themselves to get? What do they fear losing so much they'll sacrifice their dignity to protect it? Who are they trying to impress? And why does that person's opinion control them? What makes them abandon logic and react purely from emotion? Once you can see these patterns, you don't need to dominate people through force or argument. You can speak directly to their unconscious drives without them ever realizing you've identified them. This isn't manipulation in the crude sense. It's psychological efficiency. When you understand what someone actually wants beneath what they claim to want, you can communicate with surgical precision. But here's where most people stumble. They try to build this mental fortress while still carrying the emotional baggage that society has programmed into them. They want to be psychologically bulletproof while still seeking everyone's approval. They want to be unmanipulatable while still being controlled by guilt, shame, and the fear of being disliked. The fourth pillar requires something that terrifies most people, the removal of guilt as a decision maker. Society has trained you to obey guilt reflexively. Think about how they'll feel. Be nice. Don't hurt anyone's feelings. Give them another chance. This conditioning serves a purpose. It keeps you predictable, manageable, and focused on others' comfort rather than your own advancement. But guilt is not morality. It's emotional programming installed by others to ensure you serve their interests rather than your own. The ruthless mind examines every guilty feeling with a simple question. Is this guilt protecting something valuable? Or is it just a leash someone else is pulling? Sometimes you must disappoint people who drain your energy. Sometimes you must ignore pleas for one more chance from those who have already proven their unreliability. Sometimes you must say no without providing a detailed explanation that can be argued with. Sometimes you must walk away from the emotional blackmail of people addicted to your attention and resources. When that familiar guilt rises, and it will, you don't fight it or obey it. You observe it like a scientist studying an interesting specimen. You note its presence, examine its source, and then choose your action based on strategy rather than emotional manipulation. Once people learn that guilt no longer works as a tool to control you, their entire approach must change. Many will simply fade away, seeking easier targets. Others will be forced to interact with you based on actual value rather than emotional leverage. This leads us to the final foundational element, the cold internal motto that separates the ruthless mind from everyone else. I am already alone. This isn't pessimism or antisocial thinking. It's the recognition that true power comes from self-containment rather than dependency. Most people move through life silently begging, validate me, stay with me, don't abandon me, tell me I matter, prove that I'm worthy. Because their sense of security depends entirely on others' approval, they compromise constantly. They tolerate disrespect to maintain relationships. They delay their goals to accommodate others' timelines. They shrink themselves to fit into spaces where they were never truly welcome. But the ruthless mind begins from a radically different premise. You are complete unto yourself. You owe no one your diminishment. Anyone who joins your life must add strength rather than weight, value rather than drama, clarity rather than confusion. This doesn't mean isolation. It means independence before interaction. You don't need them. You choose them. And if they become disloyal, disrespectful, or destructive, you don't negotiate, argue, or beg for change. You simply release them without explanation, warning, or regret. This level of emotional self-sufficiency is what truly paralyzes people. They realize that loneliness cannot be used as leverage against you, that withdrawal of affection won't force you to compromise, that the threat of abandonment has no power over someone who has already made peace with solitude. Now, with these foundations set, something remarkable happens. You stop explaining yourself to people who are never truly listening. You stop chasing those who are walking away. You stop performing for audiences that will never applaud. Instead, you become a gravitational force that others orbit around, trying desperately to understand the source of your unshakable calm. But building the internal fortress is only the beginning. The real mastery lies in how you deploy this mental discipline in the world of human interaction. Where most people are playing psychological games, they don't even realize they're losing. The transformation from building internal strength to wielding external influence happens the moment you realize that most social interactions are psychological warfare disguised as casual conversation. Everyone is probing for weaknesses, testing boundaries, and seeking advantages, but they're doing it unconsciously, clumsily, desperately. Meanwhile, you have become something they cannot categorize or control, a mind that operates by entirely different rules. The first weapon in your invisible arsenal is what Machiavelli would have called observational dominance, the power of the stare that reads souls. When you enter any room now, you don't speak to be heard. You observe to see what's hidden beneath the social masks. Your silence becomes a form of extraction, pulling information from others without offering anything in return. Watch how people reveal themselves within moments of meeting them. The insecure ones perform louder, seeking validation through volume. The manipulative ones test boundaries immediately, seeing what they can get away with. The weak ones defer to whoever seems strongest in the moment. The dangerous ones watch you watching them, recognizing a fellow predator in the space. Your disciplined stillness forces everyone else to fill the silence, and in doing so, they expose everything. They over-explain when simple answers would suffice, revealing their guilt. They justify decisions that no one questioned, showing their shame. They defend people who weren't attacked, displaying their loyalties. They seek your approval without you asking for their performance, demonstrating their hunger for validation. This is the paradox of social power. The less you reveal, the more others expose. Your mystery becomes their compulsion. They begin studying you the way you've been studying them, but they lack the discipline to do it effectively. Instead, they project their own insecurities onto your silence, their own fears onto your calm, their own manipulations onto your stillness. When you do speak, every word must carry weight. No gossip that reveals your interests. No unnecessary stories that expose your past. No moral speeches that display your values as targets. Instead, you speak with surgical precision, either to clarify a misunderstanding, correct a false assumption, or subtly control the direction of the interaction. This contrast alone, your measured words against their unconscious verbal bleeding, creates a psychological effect that most people find deeply unsettling. They begin to question themselves. Why isn't this person reacting like everyone else? What do they know that we don't? Are they judging us? Are they planning something? The mystery of your detachment becomes more powerful than any words you could speak. But the truly advanced practitioner goes beyond creating mystery. They learn to let people destroy themselves through their own words. When someone tries to insult you, your complete stillness turns their aggression back on itself. When they lie to impress you, your unchanging expression makes their exaggeration hang awkwardly in the air. When they gossip to bond with you, your refusal to engage forces them to realize how petty they sound. You never argue with fools because argument implies they deserve your emotional energy. Instead, You let them talk until they say too much, reveal too much, promise too much, or claim too much. Your silence becomes a rope they use to hang themselves, and your patience becomes the gallows they build with their own desperation to provoke a reaction from you. This approach requires something that most people never develop: the complete rejection of the need to be liked. The ruthless mind understands that being respected is infinitely more valuable than being popular. Respect creates space and consideration. Likability creates expectations and obligations. Respect makes people think before they speak to you. Likability makes them assume you'll accommodate their whims. This doesn't mean being needlessly rude or deliberately offensive. It means being absolutely indifferent to others' approval. You say what needs to be said regardless of whether it comforts or cuts. You make decisions based on effectiveness rather than how they'll be received. You walk away from situations without needing applause or understanding from those you leave behind. People may not enjoy your company, but they'll think about you when making important decisions. They may not invite you to their parties, but they'll consider how you would handle their crisis. They may not call you a friend, but they'll remember your words when everyone else's have been forgotten. This kind of psychological permanence is far more valuable than temporary social comfort. The mastery of frame control becomes your secret weapon in every interaction. In any conversation, someone sets the terms and someone else reacts to them. Weak minds automatically adopt whatever framework others present. They answer questions as asked, defend positions they never claimed, explain themselves to people who have no right to judge them. The ruthless mind recognizes these traps and refuses to enter them. When asked an invasive question, you don't answer. You ask why they need to know. When accused of something publicly, you don't defend. You smile slightly and change the subject. When someone tries to make you explain your decisions, you don't justify. You simply state that your reasons are your own. Every time you refuse to be pulled into someone else's emotional framework, you demonstrate something that most people find both attractive and terrifying: complete ownership of your own mental space. You control what matters in the conversation. You decide which topics deserve attention. You determine the emotional tone of the interaction. This frame control extends to how you handle your reputation. The most effective practitioners understand that reputation should arrive before they do, creating a psychological environment that works in their favor before they even speak. But this reputation is not built through self-promotion or image management. It is built through consistent demonstration of your principles in action. People learn that you don't explain yourself when disrespected. They discover that you disappear rather than argue when boundaries are crossed. They realize that you deliver consequences without announcements or threats. Slowly, a very specific kind of respect develops around you, not the admiration given to the popular, but the careful consideration given to the unpredictable. This brings us to one of the most sophisticated aspects of psychological influence: the strategic use of unpredictability. The ruthless mind doesn't need to be chaotic or dramatic. It just needs to introduce carefully calculated uncertainty into others' expectations. When people can predict your responses perfectly, they become comfortable taking liberties. When they can't quite map your patterns, they become cautious about testing your limits. If you usually respond to messages immediately, occasionally delay without explanation. If you typically show warmth in social situations, sometimes remain professionally cordial instead. If someone expects praise for their efforts, offer a constructive critique instead. If a person consistently tests your patience, disappear from their life without warning or discussion. These aren't emotional outbursts or manipulative games. They calculated interruptions of pattern that keep people slightly off balance around you. The moment someone begins second-guessing themselves in your presence, wondering if they've gone too far or misread the situation, you've gained a psychological advantage that compounds over time. The most advanced practitioners learn to set psychological traps, not to hurt others, but to understand their true character under pressure. Machiavelli understood that reputation often masks reality, but stress reveals the truth. By creating subtle tests of integrity, patience, loyalty, and discretion, you can sort people into categories: those who can be trusted, those who must be managed, and those who should be avoided entirely. You might delay a favor they expect and observe whether they react with patience or entitlement. You could share different versions of a story with different people and see which version gets repeated where. You might test someone's loyalty by sharing a minor secret and tracking its journey through your social network. These aren't cruel experiments, they're practical filters. Better to discover someone's true nature through small tests than to learn it through major betrayals when the stakes are higher. When someone does cross your boundaries, the ruthless mind employs what might be called invisible consequences. You don't lash out, send messages, or create drama. You simply shift, quietly, subtly, permanently. Maybe they're no longer included in certain conversations. Maybe your responses become more formal. Maybe invitations stop coming their way. They'll feel the change without being able to identify exactly what happened. This creates a psychological phenomenon where they begin punishing themselves, replaying interactions to figure out what went wrong, gradually breaking down their own confidence while you remain completely unaffected. The final mastery is what Machiavelli would have called cold mercy, the recognition that sometimes the most devastating response to betrayal or disrespect is simply to outgrow the person who delivered it. You don't seek revenge because revenge implies they still have emotional